Cool. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and start the Bible study tonight. We're going to talk about the realm of faith. We're going to talk about the realm of faith. And so we're going to go ahead and start tonight in Mark chapter 11, verse 22. We're going to start there. Okay, and I'm going to read out of the regular King James, and then I'll take a look at another translation. So Mark 11:22, it says, "And Jesus answering saith unto them, have faith in God." Okay. So Jesus said, have faith in God. He's talking to his disciples, right? And so when we look at that, the Greek says in Mark 11:22, the Greek says, "And Jesus answering saith to them, have the faith of God." That's the Greek. Have the faith of God. So it's kind of interesting how the regular English says have faith in God, and the Greek says have the faith of God, right? So now, what is faith? We know that faith, according to Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, right? So Jesus is saying, have the faith of God. That word substance in Hebrews 11:1, it means reality, right? Or realization. So have the reality of God, right? Have God's reality, right? And so again, reality, we're gonna kind of go through what reality means, what reality is, okay? So reality is the substance of faith, okay? So a reality is a world or the state of things as they actually exist, not the idea of things. Okay, so I'll say it again. A reality is a world or the state of things as they actually exist, not the idea of things. Okay, so an idea is a formless thought. Okay, there's no form to an idea, it's simply an idea, right? A reality is a formed thought. Okay. So a reality originates from an idea. Okay. And so this is where we get belief versus faith. Belief is a set of ideas that you are convinced of to be true. Okay. Now, when these ideas move into faith, that means that those ideas have been frequently thought about, and now you can see it. They are images in your mind, right? That's where we get imagination, right? Because that's also a substance of faith, right? Now faith is the imagination of things hoped for. Now faith is the vision or the perception of things hoped for. So an idea has to be frequently meditated on in order for it to move into a reality. Okay. And so a reality can be, or I should say, a reality is experienced, right? This is why, and we're going to get a little deeper into this. This is why Jesus is big on what you believe. What do you believe, right? So if we look at Hebrews 11:1 and then verse 2, we're going to take a look at that. Let's go ahead and flip there. Hebrews 11:1 and then verse 2 as well. All right. So Hebrews 11:1. Okay. It says, now faith is the substance, or now faith is the reality of things hoped for, the evidence or the proof of things not seen, right? So when an idea takes form, that means that that particular thought has now been conceived within you, okay? When something is conceived by law, it will give birth to something, right? It'll give that particular thought that has been conceived, right? Because in order for an idea to get to the place of reality, it has to be meditated upon. That's when that's when people worry, right? So worry is a form of meditation. So when people worry and they stress, they have that negative stress and anxiety, those thoughts are now being conceived, and it's going to give birth to what? A heart attack, a disease, some form, some manifestation, right? But it began with what they believed about a situation or what they believed about themselves. And then they continually begin to think about it. And that's the worry side. Now flip the coin. What if you start meditating on something positive or a promise of God? That particular thought will then begin to form itself. It'll begin to be conceived within you, and then it'll begin to give birth into your emotions, through your body language, through your attitude, right? So that's what we're looking at here. Faith is when an idea takes form. That's faith. Belief is when an idea is simply an idea. It's formless, right? And so if we look at verse 2 in Hebrews 11, verse 2, it says, for by it, or for by faith, the elders obtained a good report. Now, verse 2, I want you to reference Philippians 4:8. Because remember, in Philippians 4:8, he says, finally, my brethren. And one of the things that he tells us to think about is whatever is of a good report. Think about, meditate, give form to it. Think about it frequently, whatever is of a good report. And he says, by faith, that's how you obtain the good report. So you move from just having it being a formless thought or an idea to having it take form. And then it gives birth within your soul, your emotions, your body, your relationships, right? Your thought patterns, your paradigm, your subconscious mind. Gives form to how you behave, how you approach certain situations, how you approach and how you even perceive challenges, right? So it's by faith that we obtain the good report. By faith, we obtain Philippians 4:8. Finally, my brethren, whatever things are good, whatever things are lovely, whatever is of a good report or praiseworthy or excellent, all those qualities, by faith, we obtain that. So we move from just thinking about it to experiencing it. So with Hebrews 11:2, reference, Philippians 4:8. And then I also want you to reference Psalm chapter 34, verse 8. Psalm chapter 34, verse 8. Looking at an idea moving into a reality. Psalm, let's see. All right. So Psalm 34:8. It says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him." Oh, taste and see. That's faith. That's faith. That's a belief that has moved into reality. So we're not speaking about anything physical. This is all internal. He said, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." That is an experience. That's a reality, right? A reality, the state of things as they actually exist, not the idea of things, right? So this is when the Lord, or the character of the Lord, becomes real, right? As we frequently meditate upon who he is, right? And so when what you hope for, has become actualized, when it becomes a realization, that's another good word, is you'll know when you're in faith when what you believe has been actualized, right? So now some beliefs, like let's just for an example, when somebody becomes a Christian for the first time, they believe in Jesus, right? They're saved, they're going to heaven, great. However, that belief has not yet been formed. It's an idea, right? Because the character of Christ has not been formed in them. And that's a lifetime process for the character of Christ to be formed. It's a renewal process, it's a lifetime process. But Paul speaks of a baby Christian versus a mature Christian, right? The mature Christian has had the time to allow the character and qualities of Jesus to become formed in them. This is what Paul talks about in Galatians: let Christ be formed in you, right? And so the character of God has to be formed, but it begins as an idea. So the new Christian, this is why it's important for the new Christian not to beat themselves up, even for a mature Christian, not to beat yourself up, not to condemn yourself, because see, you're still being formed. You're still being mature in Christ. There's still a process, right? So when people go through challenges, addictions, whatever it is, it's you should not be beating yourself up, because things are still working in you. Things are still growing in you, right? So that's probably the best example that I can think about, is when a new Christian comes to Jesus. It's an idea, they believe it, but they haven't moved into faith yet. They believe, but they haven't yet moved into a place where the qualities of God are actually being realized or actualized in their life. Now, take that same concept and translate that into your relationships. Translate the same concept, an idea moving into a reality, by frequently thinking upon a thought, right? An idea being moved into an experience, right? This is where people can watch movies and they can experience the movie. They can experience what they're watching. Their heart races, they're sweating, they can feel it, because this idea has now moved into their emotions. It's now been formed within them. This is where people, when they watch like horror films, they can go home and they're still scared. They're like, oh, what's around the corner? Because that idea has been formed in them. So now they're carrying that image, they're carrying that movie within them, and it's affecting them emotionally, mentally. It's now affecting how they see their relationships if they meditate on that frequently, right? So that's kind of how it works. When people watch other genres of films, romantic films, action, whatever it is, if they're watching it and they're really into it, they're giving so much attention to it, that picture, that image is being formed. So if we flip that, use that same concept, that's where paradigm shifts come. That's where your behavior and your decisions begin to shift and change, right? So let's go a little deeper. Let's explore how God sees us, how God sees. Does God see us based on the physical circumstance, based on the physical reality, how we physically see, or does he see through the spirit? Does he see our heart, what we believe? Let's take a look at that. let's go to Genesis chapter 11, and we're going to start in verse 4, and we're going to go into verse 6. So Genesis 11, verse 4 to 6. Because if we can learn how God sees, and then if we can learn to see how he sees, then we'll be able to be transformed. We'll be able to experience another level of peace and, balance and just progress, right? No condemnation, no guilt. So let's go to Genesis 11. Okay, and we'll start in verse 4. I need this translation. Okay, so it says, and they said, go to, let us build us a city. Notice verse 4. Let's take a look. And they said, so they're having a conversation, and they said, that's very important. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men built. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do, or which they have planned to do. This was a plan. This was an imagination. This was a conversation. The Bible never said it goes from them having a conversation to the Lord coming down to see what they built. It's like, you see what I'm saying? So let's take a look at that. In the CSB translation, it says in verse 4, and they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered throughout the earth. Then the Lord came down to look over the city and the tower that the humans were building. The Lord said, if they have begun to do this as one people, all having the same language, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Now let's take a look. Let's just throw it out. Let's just say that they were physically building the city. Notice what the Lord said, though. Nothing will be impossible to them which they have imagined to do or planned to do. In other words, their physical actions was a reflection of what they planned or imagined to do. So either way you want to put it, whether they didn't start building or whether they did start building, regardless, the Lord said whatever they plan to do, nothing will be impossible to them, which they have imagined to do. That's a big deal, right? So take a look at this. The imagination, or when you have a plan, that is a formed thought. That's a reality. That's what God is looking at. He's looking at your inner world. He's not looking at the external, because the external is simply the fruit. It's simply the result. He's not looking at that. He's looking at your belief. He's looking at your faith. He's looking at your spirit and your soul. He's looking at those two faculties there. Okay? That's what the Lord is looking at, because he knows that whatever is working in there, that's literally what's going to translate into their external reality, their physical reality. So the spiritual reality will translate itself into the physical reality. Okay? Based on the conversation, based on the plan, based on what you're frequently thinking about, right? So I want you to reference Job chapter 22, verse 28. Job 22, verse 28. I want us to reference that. I'm going to go to the ESV translation. Let's see. Would I have that ready? ESV. Okay. And verse 28. So Job 22, verse 28. All right. Let's take a look at this. It says, you will decide on a matter, and it will be established for you, and light will shine on your ways. You will decide on a matter. You will decree a thing. You will plan a thing. You will imagine a thing. See, when you decide, then your physical reality will reflect your decision. This is why Jesus said, if you look upon a woman with lustful intent, selfish intent, you have already committed adultery in your heart. Jesus is always referring to the inner world. This is why sin begins in the mind and righteousness begins in the mind. Has nothing to do with the physical. So he knows that if you make a decision and you stick to that decision, whether it takes a week, whether it takes a month, whether it takes 5 years, if you have stuck to that decision, it by law will take place in some form, in some way. It will happen by law because your body is subject to your mind. Your body is subject to your heart, right? So this is what God is looking at. This is why we can't rush. We can't think like, okay, dang, I didn't get the deal or I didn't do this by this set time and time. None of that stuff matters. Make a solid, definite decision within you. Meditate on it, think about it, plan it, write about it, talk about it, converse about it, research about it. Really begin to form your life around that decision. And then all of a sudden, your behavior and your decisions, everything else will begin to follow through as a result. Right? So when we decide to have healthy relationships, even though the physical reality says different, over time with consistent thought and consistent attention, you will find yourself attracting the right relationships. Now, you still have to decide with your will to execute, to engage, right? Because the circumstances will begin to form itself around you, but you still have to decide again to engage and to execute, to connect with the opportunity or with the people or with whatever the situation might be, right? So when we decide to believe that Jesus is my righteousness, then I become what I believe. So it's never about what I'm doing. It's about what I believe. If I believe that Jesus is my empowerment, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. I'll become that. If I believe that Jesus is my peace, that's exactly what I'll become. Because it has nothing to do with what I'm doing. It has everything to do with what I believe. And as I meditate upon what I believe, as I think about what I believe, that belief, that idea, that thought will then begin to take form, and then it'll conceive the qualities of Jesus. It'll give birth to the nature of Jesus in our lives. And we can apply that to our finances. We can apply this principle to our relationships, sports, athletics. We can apply the same principle to every area of life, right? This is why I'm big on apply Jesus to your finances, apply Jesus to your relationships. I'm not talking about the physical person of Jesus. I'm talking about the nature of Jesus, right? Through how we believe, right? And this is even evident with God and Abraham. Now, I want to take a look at this. This will be the last kind of section we look at. I want to go to Genesis chapter 16. Let's go to Genesis 16. Actually, we'll start in Genesis 15. We'll read a little bit Genesis 15. We'll read 1 to 6, and then we're going to jump into Genesis 16. Okay, so in Genesis 15, Abram, he was Abram at this point. He was not yet Abraham. He had not yet given birth. He had not yet produced any seed at this point, right? Because he was going in and out with his doubt, with his, unbelief, and then believing and unbelief. And he was just not he was not yet mature, right? So let's see, in Genesis 15, let's take a look at this, starting in verse 1. It says, after these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. And Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless? And the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus. Verse 3, and Abram said, behold, to me thou hast given no seed. You have not given me a child. And lo, one born in my house is mine heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, this shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. So he was thinking, maybe my servant will be my heir, right? I don't have any kids, maybe my servant, somebody that works for me. Now look at this. Let's go to verse 5. And he brought him forth abroad and said, look now toward heaven. Look in the sky and count the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto them, so shall thy seed be. So God gave him a picture so that this picture can take form within him. He gave him an idea. The stars is simply an idea. It's representing the generations that he would soon, give birth to through his wife, Sarah. But he gave Abram a picture, an image, an idea. And then as Abram looked at the stars and he began to count the stars, the idea began to take form. And we see that because look at verse 6. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. He counted it. Now he believed here, he was convinced, right? Now let's see it take form. Genesis 16. Let's jump to Genesis 16, starting in verse 1. This is going to get interesting. It says, now Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing, or the Lord has hindered me from having kids. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. In other words, have sex with Hagar. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened, or Abram obeyed the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife. Notice that, to be his wife. Now, Sarai was his wife, but now Sarai said, hey, you can, as a surrogate, as a substitute, fill in other words, step into my position as a wife. A wife is an office. It's a position. Okay, so this was huge here because Hagar was not a wife. She was a concubine. Verse 4, and he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Who saw? Sarai saw. She saw that, whoa, what Abram was talking about is true. He got her pregnant. Whoa, he wasn't tripping. Verse 5. And Sarai said unto Abram, my wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, behold, thy maid is in thy hand, do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly or harshly with her, she fled from her face. Now notice, Abram believed, and it never said, he believed, and it wasn't like he couldn't have a kid through Hagar. The promise or the blessing was that he would bear through Sarai. So it's almost like the ability to have intercourse was given to Abram through the word of God. Now, how Abram dealt or managed that word did not hinder the word from working. The word still worked. It just how he managed the word, how he took upon himself the word, how he stewarded the word. Still worked. He had Ishmael. And the Bible never said there's no condemnation with Abram. He's chill. He's kicking it. He's having kids, right? But see, when Sarai saw this, then she felt some kind of way, and she kicked out Hagar. And then the angel later on in the scripture, the angel tells Hagar to go back. And then eventually in chapter 17, Sarai gets on the program. She gets with the program. And then eventually she has Isaac, right? So the point here is that, see, God saw what Abram believed. He didn't necessarily focus on the physical. Because see, if we read in verse chapter 16, verse 10, look at this, verse 10. The angel's talking to Hagar about Ishmael. Verse 10, and the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. Notice that the blessing was translated to Hagar and her seed. That's what God told Abram in Genesis chapter 12. Let's go there. Let's take a look. Genesis 12, just for reference. Let's see. It says, now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house into a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Now it's interesting, because see here, we see the nation of Ishmael coming through. A nation came through Ishmael in verse 10, Genesis 16:10. The angel says, I'll multiply thy seed exceedingly. And if we keep looking at Genesis, let's look at verse 11, Genesis 16, verse 11. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, behold, thou art with child, and shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. Wow. Look at that. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So the angel said, I'll multiply thy seed. This was the same promise that he gave Abram. And the angel gave the same promise to Hagar. God looks at what we believe. He looks at what is also being formed in you. That's what he looks at. A lot of people will say that, hey, Abram made a mistake. He, and technically, I mean, it kind of was like he wasn't supposed to, the blessing wasn't supposed to come through Hagar. But that does not mean that the blessing just just no longer worked with Abram. He was still having children because of what he believed, even if he directed it in the wrong direction, it still manifested. Right? So the whole point is God looks within. He looks within. This is why you can be healed within before you're healed externally. You can be blessed, prosperous. You can have a happy marriage within first before you even have a happy marriage externally. He looks at the inner world. That's the purpose, and that's the focus of tonight. He looks at the inner world. Okay, so that concludes our study for tonight. I'm going to go ahead and